For the longest time, I had what felt like a completely reasonable explanation for why this channel, Ruben Knowledge Hub, doesn't actually exist. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to write well enough. I wasn't ready to even speak on camera. Not ready to make videos that I was personally proud of. And honestly, every one of those reasons sounded responsible. That I wasn't procrastinating. I was preparing. Then one evening, I asked myself a question, something that I've been avoiding for over a year. What exactly am I waiting for? Not in a kind of motivational way, not exactly, but literally. Like, what has to become true before I finally consider myself ready? I expected the answer to just come immediately, but instead, I just sat there. Because for the first time, I realized something strange, that I'd been trusting an an excuse that I personally even couldn't explain. And when I noticed that, I couldn't believe how many other parts of my life worked exactly the same way. For more than a year, every time I thought about starting this channel, the conversation ended the same way. I'm just not ready yet. And the strange part is, that answer always felt intelligent. It sounded patient, responsible, like I cared about quality instead of rushing something into the world. I tell myself I needed to become a better writer. I needed a clearer niche, better equipment, more expensive. Every reason sounded sensible on its own, which meant I never questioned any of them. Because that's the thing about an excuse, like, I'm not ready. It never asks you to define itself. It sounds specific without actually saying anything. Ready for what? Ready by whose standard? Ready compared to when? I never asked. So the excuse never had to answer. It simply stayed there, quietly ending every conversation before it could begin. Looking back, I don't think I was protecting the quality of the channel. I was protecting myself from finding out what would happen if I started before I felt certain. And as long as I kept calling that feeling preparation, it never looked like avoidance. The more I talked about it, the more I realized that the stranger it became. Because for over a year, I trusted this explanation without even asking it to explain itself. I'm not ready. That sentence sounded so complete, like I'd reached a conclusion after carefully weighing everything up. But when I actually stopped and looked at it, I realized that it wasn't a conclusion at all. It was just a sentence I had repeated often enough that it felt true. Because what does ready actually mean? Ready for what? Ready according to who? What would have to change before I finally believed I had arrived? I couldn't answer any of those questions. Not because they were difficult, but because I never asked them. And that's when something clicked. The excuses that keep us stuck usually aren't the loud ones. They're the ones that sound so reasonable that we never think to question them. I'm not ready. I need more experience. The timing isn't right. Every one of those feels specific when you hear it. But look a little closer and they start to dissolve. How much experience? What exactly is the right time? What would tomorrow have that today doesn't? The answers never seem to arrive because the excuse was never built to answer those questions. It was built to stop me asking them. And that's why it lasted so long, not because it was true, because it was vague enough to survive. The less clearly I defined it ready, the easier it became to keep waiting for them. So that evening, I did something I'd somehow never done before. I stopped asking whether I was ready, and I asked the excuse to explain itself. Not vaguely, but specifically. What would ready actually look like? What would have to become true before I finally believed I could start? What was the condition I was waiting for? I expected those questions to lead somewhere, but instead they led nowhere. I sat there for a while trying to come up with an answer that felt real. A milestone, a skill that I had mastered, a point where I'd finally be allowed to begin, but nothing came. Not because I couldn't think of an answer, but because there was actually none. That was when I realized something that made me genuinely uncomfortable. Ready wasn't a destination, it was just a feeling, and I've been waiting for that feeling to give me permission to start. The problem is, feelings don't work like milestones. They don't just arrive because you've reached a certain level, they don't suddenly appear after enough preparation. If they show up at all, they usually arrive somewhere in the middle of doing the thing, not before it. Which meant that I could have waited forever because I wasn't waiting for a finish line. I was waiting for an emotion. And emotions don't have deadlines. Once I saw that, I couldn't stop seeing it. It wasn't just the channel, it was the project I'd been thinking about, the conversation I'd have when the time was right, the decisions I'd make once things settled down. Different situations, different words, the same pattern underneath all of them. I wasn't actually waiting for readiness, I was waiting for certainty. And I spent so long calling that preparation that I never realized it was permission I was really looking for. Once I named it that way, the question changed. It wasn't why was I ready, but was why did I need permission in the first place? And the answer was the same one I'd found earlier in this series. The video about the gap between knowing and doing. I didn't want to find out that what I made wasn't as good as what I'd imagined it could be. I didn't want to be a visible beginner. I'm not ready yet was just a more respectful way of holding that. And it sounded like patience, like standards, like the thing, kind of thing that a serious person would say before doing something that actually mattered. Underneath it was the same thing it had always been, just wearing better clothes. And that's what makes this kind of story so hard to question. Because it doesn't sound like fear, it sounds like wisdom. It sounds like the careful, considered position of someone who takes the work seriously. The most convincing stories aren't the ones that actually fool other people, but they are the ones that fool you. And they fool you for exactly as long as you never ask them what they're protecting. I started this channel without feeling ready. Not because the fear disappeared, not because I found the permission I'd been looking for, but because I finally understood that the permission wasn't coming. Not from outside, not from a feeling, not even from reaching some kind of level of preparation that could finally make starting feeling safe. The first video wasn't good. I knew that while I was making it, but I made it anyway. And the second one wasn't even slightly better. And the one after that, slightly better again. Not because I had waited long enough, but because I actually started. Every video in this series, this one included, was made by someone who still hadn't fully figured it out. Now, this is not a kind of disclaimer of any kind, not at all, but I'm trying to strike a point. Readiness isn't something that arrives before you start, it's something that accumulates after the permission you've been waiting for. It doesn't arrive before you start either. It's what you give yourself quietly, without ceremony, the moment you decide to begin anyway. Now, if you've been watching this series from all the way from the beginning, well, that is nice of you. You will have noticed something, that every video has been about a version of the same thing, a story that felt enough to question, the consistency story, the knowing going gap, the advice that was written for your situation, the tracker that became the goal, the quitting that you didn't even notice, and the direction that you stopped checking. And now this, the story that you not ready yet. They are the same pattern, showing up in different places, and once you start recognizing it in theory, something actually changes in how you actually approach all of it. These 3 videos left in this final series. The next one is about what happens when you finally name the pattern clearly and what you actually do with that.